They told me my husband died in a car crash. They made me plan his funeral. They watched me cry over an empty coffin. Then, at the service, I looked up and saw Robert standing in the back of the room, alive. A second later, my phone lit up. Run. They're watching us. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know the truth. Please, listen until the end, and click on the subscribe button and tell me where you're listening from. I need to know if this reaches someone. It was raining that morning. The kind of cold, persistent rain that turns black fabric heavy and makes your bones ache. The church smelled like wet wool and funeral lilies, too many lilies, suffocating and sweet. People moved around me in slow motion, whispering condolences I couldn't hear, touching my shoulders with gloved hands. I stood there numb, staring at the mahogany coffin draped in white lilies, not the yellow roses Robert loved, not the wildflowers we'd picked on our first anniversary. White lilies, Brenda's choice. His sister had insisted, said they were more dignified, more appropriate for a man of Robert's standing. But Robert hated lilies, said they smelled like hospitals and sadness. That small detail haunted me through the entire service, like the whole funeral had been written by someone who didn't actually know him. When the pastor began speaking, the words blurred into background noise. I heard rain drumming against the stained glass windows, louder than the eulogy. My daughter stood beside me, silent and distant, her hand barely touching mine. Everything felt wrong. The timing, the flowers, the perfectly scripted sympathy. Then I saw him. Standing near the back of the church, half hidden behind two men in dark suits. Robert, thinner, pale, shadows under his eyes I didn't recognize, but unmistakably him, my husband, alive. My brain refused the information. I blinked hard, twice, thinking exhaustion had finally broken me. But when I opened my eyes again, he was still there, still watching me. His expression was calm, deliberate, the way he looked when he was about to tell me something important. Then, slowly, he raised one finger to his lips. Don't speak. The room tilted. My hands gripped the edge of the pew so hard I felt splinters dig into my palms. He was alive. Robert was alive. Before I could move, before I could breathe, a hand landed on my shoulder. Soft, but firm. Maria, you should sit down. You look like you're going to faint. Brenda, Robert's sister. Her voice was gentle, concerned, almost motherly, but her fingers dug into my arm like a warning. I nodded weakly and sank back into the pew, my eyes snapping back to where Robert had stood. The spot was empty. I scanned the rows of mourners, lawyers, neighbors, family. No one looked back. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe grief had finally cracked something inside me. When the service ended, I floated through the crowd like a ghost. People offered the same hollow phrases. He was such a good man. You'll get through this. My daughter stood with her arms wrapped around herself, watching me with confusion and something else I couldn't name. Dave, Brenda's son-in-law, hovered near her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. He smiled politely when our eyes met, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes were cold, calculating. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Brenda appeared beside me again, already holding an umbrella over my head. Maria, you shouldn't be alone today, she said. Come back to the house with us. Dave will make sure everything's taken care of. Her tone left no space for disagreement. I forced a weak smile. I just need a little time. I'll be fine. Brenda's eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, then softened again. Of course, darling, but please don't isolate yourself. Grief can make us see things that aren't there. She squeezed my hand once, then turned away, her black umbrella gliding through the mist like a shadow. When most of the crowd had cleared, I stepped aside, pretending to adjust my coat, and pulled out my phone. A notification blinked on the screen. Unknown number. Run, they're watching us. I stopped breathing. The message had been sent 2 minutes ago. My hands shook as I read it again, They're watching us. Us. Not just me. Whoever sent this knew something, knew Robert, knew I'd seen him. My heart hammered so loudly the rain sounded distant. I turned slowly, scanning the parking lot. A few people still lingered by their cars, speaking in low voices. Everything looked normal. Then I saw it, a black SUV parked across the street. Tinted windows, engine idling, headlights aimed directly at me. I looked away quickly, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Brenda and Dave were standing near the church entrance, speaking quietly. Both of them glanced in my direction. Dave said something, and Brenda nodded, slipping her phone back into her coat pocket. It felt choreographed, coordinated. I forced my legs to move, one step at a time, toward my car. My fingers were so cold I dropped my keys twice before I managed to unlock the door. The moment I got inside, I locked it and started the engine. My phone buzzed again. "Don't go home." I stared at the words, my pulse racing. In the rearview mirror, Brenda and Dave were walking toward their car. Not rushing, not slow, just watching. I didn't think. I shifted into drive and pulled out into the rain, my tires splashing through puddles as I left the church behind. My husband was alive. Someone was following me. And whatever this was, it had been happening long before today. As I reached the first intersection, my phone buzzed one last time. Trust no one, not even them. I didn't sleep that night. The rain never stopped, tapping against the windows like something trying to get in. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone clenched in both hands, staring at that final message. Trust no one, not even them. Them, Brenda, Dave. The people who'd been at my side since the moment Robert died, guiding every decision, organizing every detail, always close, always watching. Suddenly, every kind gesture looked like control. Around 3 a.m., I made tea. I never drank and sat at the kitchen table. The house felt empty, in a way that went beyond grief. No scattered legal briefs, no half-finished coffee cup, no sound of Robert's voice on late-night calls. It didn't feel like mourning anymore. It felt like a set someone had cleared. I opened my laptop and typed Robert's name into the search bar. Article after article appeared, all repeating the same story. Local attorney dies in late-night highway crash. Vehicle engulfed in flames. Body identified through dental records. I clicked on a photo of the wreckage. The car was destroyed, melted into twisted metal, unrecognizable. A thought cut through the fog in my mind, sharp and cold. If the car burned that badly, how could they identify him? Dental records. But dental records could be falsified, switched. That would require access, connections, authority. And Robert's firm, his family, had all three. I scrolled further. Condolence messages from colleagues, from clients, from Brenda, from Dave. Every comment is perfectly timed, perfectly worded. Too perfect. And that's when I knew. Robert hadn't died in that crash. Someone wanted me to believe he had. The question was, why? And who else was in on the lie? I closed the laptop as dawn broke grey and cold through the kitchen window. The house around me felt different now, like I was seeing it for the first time. Everything was too clean, too organized. The living room looked like a showroom, cushions perfectly arranged, no stray papers, no coffee rings on the side table where Robert always left his mug. Even the air felt sterile, scrubbed of his presence. This wasn't what grief looked like. This was what erasure looked like. My phone rang at 7:30 a.m. Brenda's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my voice hoarse from no sleep. "Maria, darling, I wanted to check on you." Her tone was warm, practiced. "You left so quickly yesterday. We were worried." "I'm fine, just needed some space." Of course, of course." A pause, then softer, almost probing. "You didn't go anywhere unusual, did you? Sometimes in our grief, we make impulsive decisions." My stomach tightened. I came straight home. Good, that's good. Relief, or something like it, coloured her voice. Dave and I will stop by this afternoon, bring some groceries, help you sort through Robert's things. You shouldn't be doing this alone. I don't need. We insist. Family takes care of family, Maria. We'll see you around 2. She hung up before I could protest. I stared at the phone, her words echoing in my head. You didn't go anywhere unusual. How would she know where I went? Unless someone had been watching. I pulled up the news articles again, reading them more carefully this time. The crash happened at 11:47 p.m. on Route 27. A single vehicle accident. The car veered off the road and hit a concrete barrier. Erupting in flames. No witnesses. Body burned beyond recognition. Dental records provided by the family confirm the victim's identity. Dental records provided by the family. By Brenda. I clicked through the comment section beneath the article. Dozens of condolences, time-stamped. The official news report went live at 2:15 a.m., but several comments appeared at 1:48 a.m., 1:52 a.m., 2:03 a.m., all from people connected to Robert's firm, all expressing shock and sadness before the public even knew he was dead. They'd known in advance. They'd been prepared. My daughter's voice startled me from the doorway. "Mum, what are you doing up?" I minimized the browser window too quickly, my hands shaking. Couldn't sleep. You? She leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed, eyes red-rimmed. Same. She hesitated, then stepped closer. Mum, Aunt Brenda called me this morning. She's worried about you. She said you've been acting strange. Strange how? She didn't say exactly, just that grief can make people paranoid, that we need to watch you carefully. Her voice cracked. Mum, I'm scared. First Dad, and now you're... I'm fine, I said too sharply. I promise, I'm just tired. She didn't look convinced. Dave said he can help with Dad's paperwork, legal stuff. He said it's important we handle things quickly before the firm starts asking questions. Dave said that? Yeah, he's been really helpful, actually. He and Aunt Brenda both have. She smiled weakly. At least we have family we can trust. The words hit me like cold water. She believed them. My own daughter believed them. Sure, I whispered. At least we have that. After she left, I picked up my phone and typed a message to the unknown number. Who are you? What's happening? I sent it and waited. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10. Nothing. I tried calling the number. It rang once, then disconnected. No voicemail, no response. Whoever had warned me was either unable or unwilling to help further. At 1:45 p.m., I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked out the window. Brenda and Dave right on schedule. Brenda carried a casserole dish. Dave had a briefcase. They moved with purpose, synchronized, like actors who'd rehearsed their roles. I watched them approach the front door, and something inside me solidified. This house wasn't safe. These people weren't here to help. They were here to watch, to control, to make sure I didn't ask the wrong questions. I couldn't stay. When they knocked, I didn't answer. I stood frozen in the hallway, barely breathing, until I heard Dave's voice through the door. Maria, we know you're in there. Open up. Not a request, a command. I backed away slowly, grabbed my keys and purse from the counter, and slipped out through the back door. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to leave. That night, I would find somewhere to hide, somewhere to think, somewhere to figure out what Robert had uncovered that was worth faking his death. Whatever it was, they'd killed him for it once already. I wasn't going to let them kill him, or me, again. I drove for 2 hours, taking back roads and county highways I barely recognized. Every pair of headlights in my rearview mirror felt like a threat. Every dark SUV made my heart race. By the time I saw the flickering neon sign for the Sunrise Motel, exhaustion had settled into my bones like lead. The place was exactly what I needed. Forgotten, anonymous, the kind of roadside stop where no one asked questions. I paid cash for 3 nights, gave a fake name, and parked my car behind the building where it couldn't be seen from the road. The clerk barely looked up from his phone. Inside the room, I kept the lights off and the curtains drawn. The only illumination came from the bathroom, a thin slice of yellow cutting across the worn carpet. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling, and stared at my phone. Still no response from the unknown number. I turned it off completely and removed the battery, just in case. The next morning, I drove 15 miles to an electronics store and bought a prepaid phone with cash. No name, no contract, no trail. When I got back to the motel, I locked the door, wedged a chair under the handle, and finally allowed myself to think. Robert had been careful, meticulous. If he had discovered something dangerous, he would have left evidence somewhere safe. I thought back to the weeks before his death. Before his supposed death, he'd been distracted, working late, mentioning audits and discrepancies he couldn't discuss. Then I remembered. The old backup drive he kept in his home office, the one he thought I didn't know about, hidden inside a hollowed-out law book on the top shelf. I'd grabbed it on my way out the back door without thinking. Now, I pulled it from my purse and connected it to my laptop with shaking hands. Most of the files were encrypted, password protected behind layers of security I couldn't crack. But there was one folder labeled Beckham Project Overview that opened immediately, almost like he'd wanted someone to find it. Inside were spreadsheets, scanned contracts, email chains. I read through them slowly, my stomach twisting tighter with each line. The Beckham's family business, a regional logistics and real estate empire that Brenda had inherited and expanded, was at the center of everything. Millions of dollars moving through shell companies, offshore accounts with transactions that made no sense, invoices for services never rendered. Dave's name appeared again and again. His digital signature on falsified contracts, his authorization on wire transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. And threaded through it all, Brenda's influence, her connections in the county assessor's office, her leverage over local inspectors, her ability to make documents appear or disappear. Robert had been building a case against his own sister, against the family business, and he had been close to finishing it when he died. I pulled up the crash report again, comparing it against the financial records. The accident happened on November 3rd at 11:47 p.m., but according to the bank statements, a wire transfer was authorized from Dave's account at 11:52 p.m. That same night, 5 minutes after Robert supposedly crashed. The timelines didn't match. The coroner's report was filed within 3 hours, impossibly fast for a body that required dental identification. Even the police report looked too clean, too finished, as if it had been written in advance. I picked up the prepaid phone and called the county coroner's office. "I'm calling about the Robert Vargas case," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm family. I had some questions about the identification process." The woman on the line paused. "Ma'am, I'd have to transfer you to the medical examiner, but I can tell you that case was handled very quickly. Unusual, actually. The dental records came in before we even formally requested them." My blood went cold. "Before you requested them?" "Yes, ma'am. The family, I believe it was his sister, provided them within an hour of the body arriving. Said she wanted to expedite things. We normally have to submit a formal request to the dentist, but in this case—" "Thank you," I whispered and ended the call. I sat there in the dark motel room, the pieces finally clicking into place. The dental records weren't just falsified, they were never officially requested. Brenda had provided them herself, using her connections, her influence, her control over every detail. They'd staged the entire crash, created a body, fabricated evidence, manipulated the system from the inside, and Robert, brilliant, careful Robert, had seen it coming. He'd faked his death because staying alive and identified meant becoming their scapegoat or their victim. He'd disappeared to survive. And now someone was trying to bring me into the truth, one terrifying breadcrumb at a time. I looked at the backup drive. At the evidence, Robert had risked everything to gather and made a decision. If he was out there, if he was alive and running, then I wasn't going to let his work die in vain. I was going to finish what he started. Even if it destroyed the family that destroyed us first, I was going to finish what he started. Even if it destroyed the family that destroyed us first. But I couldn't do it from a motel room. I needed information, resources, and most of all, I needed to stay invisible. The next morning, I drove 30 miles to a town I'd never visited and found a small public library tucked between a hardware store and a diner. The kind of place with outdated computers and a librarian who looked like she'd been there since the building opened. I chose a corner desk far from the windows, logged into a guest account, and continued digging through the files Robert had left behind. I cross-referenced names, traced shell companies, mapped out the financial web that connected the Beckhams' business to offshore accounts and falsified contracts. The deeper I went, the more obvious it became. This wasn't just fraud. This was systematic, coordinated, protected. I was so focused on the screen, I didn't notice someone standing beside me until she spoke. "You're Maria Vargas." I jerked back, my hand instinctively moving to close the laptop. A woman stood there, mid-30s, dark hair pulled into a ponytail, eyes red-rimmed like she hadn't slept in days. She held a coffee cup in both hands, gripping it like a lifeline. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "You have me confused with someone." "I don't." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I've been looking for you. I didn't know if you'd even be alive." She glanced around nervously, then pulled out the chair across from me. "Please, just 5 minutes. My name is Amy Samantha." The name didn't register at first. Then it hit me like a punch to the chest. "Samantha, Michael Samantha was my brother." Her eyes glistened. "He worked with your husband at the firm. He disappeared 8 months ago." I stared at her, my mind racing. Disappeared? Vanished. No note, no goodbye, no trace. The firm said he quit, moved abroad, wanted a fresh start, but Michael would never leave without telling me. Never. She set the coffee cup down, her hands shaking. Then I found his research, hidden files on his personal laptop, financial records, emails, notes about the Beckhams' business. He was investigating the same fraud your husband was. My throat tightened. "How did you find me?" "I saw your name in his files. Maria Vargas, wife of Robert Vargas, senior attorney. Michael had flagged you both as potential allies. People who might know the truth." She leaned forward. "When I heard about Robert's accident, I knew it wasn't real. The same thing happened to Michael. They made him disappear, and now they're trying to make you disappear too." I should have been cautious, suspicious even, but something in her voice, the exhaustion and desperation that mirrored my own, told me she was telling the truth. "What did your brother find?" I asked. Amy pulled a thumb drive from her jacket pocket and slid it across the table. Everything he could gather before they came for him. Shell companies, laundering money through the Beckham's logistics network, Dave authorizing illegal contracts, Brenda using her political connections to bury investigations. It's all there. But it wasn't enough. He needed more proof, and he was running out of time. I opened my laptop and plugged in the drive. The files mirrored what Robert had collected: overlapping transactions, identical offshore accounts, the same pattern of threats and cover-ups. 2 men, investigating the same crime, both erased from existence. "They threatened him," Amy continued, her voice breaking. "Anonymous messages, photos of me, of our mother. Then one day, he called me and said he had to go away for a while, that it wasn't safe. That was the last time I heard his voice." "Do you think he's still alive?" I whispered. "I don't know." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "But I know your husband is." My breath caught. "How?" "Because Michael told me Robert was planning something, an exit strategy, a way to survive if things went wrong." She wiped her eyes. "Robert faked his death, Maria. And if he did, maybe Michael did too. Maybe they're both out there waiting for someone to finish what they started." Hope and terror collided in my chest. "We can't do this alone." Even with evidence, Brenda has connections, power. I know someone, Amy interrupted. Inside the district attorney's office, someone Michael trusted. If we can give them enough proof, real proof they can't ignore, they'll act. But we need everything, documents, recordings, witnesses. We need to build a case they can't bury. I looked at the files on the screen, at the woman sitting across from me, who'd lost her brother, the same way I'd lost my husband. We were both ghosts now, haunting the edges of a conspiracy that had already tried to erase us. Okay, I said. Then let's build it. Amy nodded, something fierce and determined flashing in her eyes. They think we're just grieving women. Broken, easy to control. That's their mistake. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than fear. I felt anger, purpose. I wasn't alone anymore, and together, we were going to tear their empire apart. And together, we were going to tear their empire apart. But first, I needed to see it with my own eyes. The lie carved into stone. The grave that held nothing but deception. The cemetery was quiet when I arrived late that afternoon. The kind of heavy silence that settles over places meant for the dead. Grey clouds hung low, threatening rain. I parked near the entrance and walked slowly through rows of headstones until I found it. Robert James Vargas. Beloved husband, father, brother, 1978 to 2024. The stone was pristine, freshly carved, the letters still sharp. White roses lay across the base, Brenda's touch, no doubt. I knelt down, my fingers brushing the cold marble, and felt nothing. No grief, no connection, just the hollow echo of a performance. Then I looked at the soil. It was too fresh, dark, loose, recently turned. But the funeral had been over a week ago. The ground should have settled by now, compacted, showing signs of age. Instead, it looked like someone had disturbed it within the last few days. Dug something up or buried something new. My stomach turned. What were they hiding here? I thought I might find you here. The voice came from behind me, smooth and measured. I stood slowly and turned. Brenda stood a few feet away, dressed in a black coat and leather gloves, an umbrella tucked under her arm despite the absence of rain. She looked immaculate, untouched by grief or guilt. I come here sometimes, I said carefully. To think. Of course you do, it's natural. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning my face with clinical precision. But Maria, I'm worried about you. You left the house so suddenly the other day. You won't return my calls. Your daughter says you've been acting paranoid. I'm not paranoid. Grief does strange things to the mind, darling. Her tone was soft, almost pitying. It makes us see patterns that aren't there. Imagine conspiracies. Sometimes in our pain, we create elaborate stories to make sense of senseless tragedy. I held her gaze. Is that what you think I'm doing? I think you're suffering. She moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I think you're exhausted, overwhelmed, and looking for someone to blame. But Robert's death was an accident, Maria. A terrible, horrible accident. No amount of digging will change that. Digging. I repeated the word slowly. Interesting choice. Her eyes narrowed just for a second. What are you suggesting? I called the coroner's office, I said, my heart pounding. They told me something interesting. The dental records you provided, the ones used to identify Robert, were submitted before they were even formally requested. You gave them the records within an hour of the body arriving. Brenda's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. A tightening, like a wire pulled taut. I was trying to help, to spare you the agony of waiting. How did you get them so quickly? I have connections, resources. I thought it would ease your pain to have closure. Or maybe, I said, taking a step forward, you had them ready because you knew exactly what was going to happen. Because you planned it. The mask cracked. Just for a moment, I saw it. A flash of cold calculation behind her sympathetic smile. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder, sharper. You need to be very careful, Maria. Her voice lost its warmth. You're making dangerous accusations. Wild theories that could destroy what's left of this family. The family you're stealing from. Her jaw tightened. I don't know what you think you've found. The Beckham's business, the offshore accounts, the shell companies Dave's been running. Robert knew everything, didn't he? That's why you had to get rid of him. Brenda's eyes blazed. For a long moment she said nothing, just stared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. When she finally spoke, her voice was ice. You have no idea how deep this goes. She stepped closer, towering over me. You think you've uncovered some little scandal, some family squabble over money. This is bigger than you, bigger than Robert, bigger than anyone you could possibly reach. Walk away while you still can. Or what? She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Or you'll end up in a grave that isn't empty. The threat hung between us, raw and undisguised. I forced myself not to flinch, not to look away. You killed him, I whispered, or tried to. I protected this family, Brenda hissed, from reckless idealists who don't understand how the world actually works. Robert was going to destroy everything our family built. I couldn't let that happen. So you staged his death. I did what was necessary. She straightened, adjusting her gloves with a deliberate care. And if you continue down this path, I'll do what's necessary again. Think about your daughter, Maria. Think about what happens to her if you keep asking questions. The mention of my daughter sent ice through my veins, but I held my ground. You won't touch her. I won't have to. Accidents happen. People disappear. Grief-stricken widows make poor decisions and end up in institutions. Or worse. She turned to leave, then paused. Go home, Maria. Mourn your husband. Move on. Or join him. She walked away through the headstones, her footsteps measured and confident. I stood there, shaking, watching her disappear into the grey afternoon. She knew exactly what I'd found, exactly what I was planning, and she'd just declared war. I looked down at Robert's grave one last time, at the fresh soil, hiding whatever truth they'd buried here, and made a promise. I wasn't walking away. I was going to finish this. I wasn't walking away. I was going to finish this. I drove back to the motel as darkness fell, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Brenda's words echoed in my head like a death sentence. Think about your daughter. Accidents happen. The threat wasn't veiled anymore. It was direct, personal, and terrifyingly real. When I pulled into the motel parking lot, I sat in the car for a full minute, scanning the shadows, checking for black SUVs or unfamiliar vehicles. Nothing. But that didn't mean they weren't watching. I grabbed my bag and walked quickly to my room, key already in hand. The door was locked, exactly as I'd left it, but something felt wrong. That instinct, the one I'd learned to trust over the past week, prickled at the back of my neck. Then I saw it, a manila envelope on the floor, just inside the door. Someone had slipped it underneath while I was gone. My heart hammered as I picked it up. No markings, no return address, just the weight of something inside, thin, rectangular. I locked the door behind me, wedged the chair under the handle, and opened it with trembling fingers. A photograph slid out onto the bed. My daughter, sitting at an outdoor cafe, coffee cup in hand, smiling at someone off camera. The image was sharp, recent, taken maybe yesterday, maybe today. She wore the blue scarf I'd given her for her birthday. I recognized the cafe. It was 3 blocks from her apartment. They'd been watching her. Beneath the photo was a note, typed in cold, impersonal letters. Stay quiet or she disappears. The room tilted. I couldn't breathe. My baby, my daughter, smiling and unaware that someone had been close enough to photograph her. Close enough to hurt her. Panic clawed up my throat, sharp and choking. I grabbed my phone to call her, then stopped. What would I say? They're watching you. You're in danger because of me. That would only terrify her, make her a bigger target. Or worse, she might tell Brenda, still believing her aunt was trying to help. I forced myself to breathe, slowly, in and out. Fear was what they wanted. Fear made people compliant, silent, easy to control. But I wasn't going to let fear win. Not anymore. I looked at the photograph again, and something inside me hardened. They'd just made a fatal mistake. They thought threatening my daughter would break me. Instead, it gave me clarity. I wasn't just fighting for the truth anymore. I was fighting for her life. I pulled out my laptop and opened the encrypted files Robert had left behind, along with everything Amy had given me. I uploaded them to 3 separate cloud servers, each with different access protocols. Then I sent copies to 2 whistleblower organizations and 1 journalist I'd found who specialized in corporate fraud. If anything happened to me, the information would still get out. Next, I called Amy on the prepaid phone. "It's me," I said when she answered. "They threatened my daughter." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Maria, I'm not backing down." My voice was steel now, cold and focused. "We need to move faster. Can your contact at the DA's office meet us?" "Yes, tomorrow morning. There's a diner outside the city, neutral ground. I'll text you the address." "Good. Bring everything your brother collected. I'll bring Robert's files." "It's time to end this." "Are you sure you're ready?" Amy's voice was gentle, worried. "I don't have a choice anymore. They made this personal." After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the photograph of my daughter. I memorized her face, her smile, the way the sunlight caught in her hair. I promised myself that when this was over, she'd be safe. She'd know the truth. And the people who'd tried to destroy us would pay. My phone buzzed. Not the prepaid. My original phone. The one I'd turned off and hidden in my bag days ago. I pulled it out, hands shaking, and powered it on. 1 new message. Unknown number. "It's time." My breath caught. I stared at the 2 words, simple and direct, and felt something shift inside me. This was the same number that had warned me at the funeral. The same person who'd told me to run. To trust no one. Robert. It had to be. He'd been watching, waiting, guiding me from the shadows. And now he was telling me it was time to finish what he couldn't. I typed back quickly. "I'm ready. Where are you?" The response came almost immediately. "Finish it first, then we'll find each other." Tears stung my eyes. He was alive. Somewhere out there, my husband was alive. And he believed in me. Believed I could do what needed to be done. I looked at the photograph of my daughter one last time, then slid it into my bag alongside all the evidence. Tomorrow, I would meet with the DA's contact. Tomorrow, I would hand over everything that could bring down Brenda, Dave, and the entire corrupt empire they'd built. And when it was over, when the truth finally came to light, Robert and I would find our way back to each other. I just had to survive long enough to see it through. I texted Amy 1 final message. "Tomorrow changes everything." Her response was immediate. "Let's burn it all down." I turned off the lights and sat in the darkness, listening to the sound of distant traffic, preparing myself for what came next. The war wasn't over, but the final battle was about to begin. The war wasn't over, but the final battle was about to begin. The meeting with the DA's contact that morning had been brief but decisive. A sharp-eyed woman named Detective Claire Morrison reviewed our evidence with methodical precision. The financial records, the falsified crash reports, the pattern of threats and disappearances. When she finished, she looked up at Amy and me with grim determination. "This is enough to bring them in," she said. "But we need them to incriminate themselves. On record, can you do that?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Tell me what you need." Now, 12 hours later, I stood in the shadows of an abandoned warehouse on the industrial edge of town, a recording device hidden in my jacket pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs. The building smelled of rust and old oil, moonlight cutting through broken windows in pale strips. Amy was positioned outside in her car, phone ready to trigger the police response the moment I gave the signal. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "They're coming. 2 minutes, I'm here." Robert. He was here, somewhere in the darkness, watching over me one last time. The knowledge steadied my shaking hands. I heard them before I saw them, footsteps echoing across concrete, confident and unhurried. Brenda emerged first from the far entrance, immaculate even now in a tailored coat, her face carved from stone. Dave followed, flanked by two large men in dark clothing, their expressions blank and professional. Hired muscle. Of course. Maria? Brenda's voice echoed through the empty space. I'm disappointed. I gave you a chance to walk away. You gave me a threat, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Against my daughter. A warning, she corrected, moving closer. One you should have heeded. Her eyes flicked to the bag at my feet. I assume that's what I think it is. Every file Robert collected. Every piece of evidence linking you and Dave to the Beckhams' fraud. All of it. Dave stepped forward, his jaw tight. Hand it over, Maria. This doesn't have to get ugly. Ugly? I almost laughed. You faked my husband's death. You threatened my child. You made a man disappear because he discovered your crimes. It's already ugly, Dave. You don't understand what you're interfering with, Brenda said coldly. This is business. This is survival. Robert was going to destroy everything. Ruin the family, collapse the company, put hundreds of people out of work. I did what I had to do. You committed fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, murder for all I know. Robert's death was necessary, she snapped, her composure finally cracking. He wouldn't listen to reason. He thought his precious ethics were worth more than family legacy. I smiled and it felt like ice. Except Robert isn't dead. The silence that followed was deafening. Brenda's face went white. Dave took a step back. What did you say? Brenda whispered. I pulled out my phone and held it up, playing the traffic camera footage I'd uncovered days ago, grainy but unmistakable. Robert, alive, walking away from a gas station 3 towns over, 2 days after his supposed death. He faked it, I said. He knew you were coming for him, so he disappeared. And now I have proof. That's impossible, Dave started, but his voice died as a figure stepped out of the shadows behind me. Robert. He looked thinner, exhausted, his face shadowed with weeks of fear and hiding. But he was alive. Unmistakably, undeniably alive. Hello, Brenda, he said quietly. Brenda staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth. No, you're dead? You tried. Robert's voice was hard, cold. You falsified records, bribed officials, staged a crash, but you underestimated me. Robert, please, she began, but I cut her off. I recorded you, I said, pulling out my phone again. At the cemetery, every threat you made, every admission. I pressed play. Brenda's voice filled the warehouse, cold and clear. Walk away while you still can, or you'll end up in a grave that isn't empty. I did what was necessary. Her face crumbled. Dave lunged forward, reaching for the phone, but Robert stepped between us. It's over, Robert said. No, Dave shouted, gesturing to the hired men. Get that evidence, now. But before they could move, the sound of sirens erupted outside, sharp, urgent, closing in fast. Red and blue lights flooded through the windows. Amy had made the call. The 2 hired men froze, then turned and ran. Dave grabbed Brenda's arm, trying to pull her toward the back exit, but it was too late. Police officers burst through both entrances, guns drawn, voices shouting commands. Brenda Vargas, Dave Mitchell, hands up, now! Brenda stood frozen, her perfect composure shattered, tears streaming down her face. Dave raised his hand slowly, his expression hollow, defeated. Detective Morrison strode in behind the officers, her eyes meeting mine with grim satisfaction. We got them. My legs gave out. I collapsed against Robert and his arms wrapped around me, solid and real and impossibly alive. I sobbed into his chest as police swarmed around us, as Brenda and Dave were handcuffed and read their rights, as the nightmare that had consumed my life finally ended. It's over, Robert whispered into my hair. You did it. It's over. I held on to him like he might disappear again, like this might all be another lie. But he was real, warm, breathing. We'd survived, together. The trial lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of sitting in that cold courtroom, watching Brenda's perfectly composed mask crack a little more each day. She arrived every morning in designer suits, her hair styled flawlessly, her expression carefully neutral. But I could see it, the tightness around her eyes, the way her jaw clenched when the prosecutor presented another piece of evidence. Dave looked worse. He'd lost weight, his expensive clothes hanging loose on his frame. He wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, not even his own lawyer's. The prosecution laid it all out methodically. Forged contracts, offshore accounts, years of money laundering funneled through the Beckham's family business, the falsified accident report, the manipulated dental records, the surveillance, the threats. When they played the recording of Brenda threatening me, her voice cold and venomous, nothing like the sympathetic sister-in-law she'd pretended to be, I watched several jurors visibly recoil. Robert testified on day 12. He'd been granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation, for the encrypted files he'd hidden, for every detail of the fraud scheme he'd uncovered. I sat in the gallery and watched him speak calmly, precisely, laying out how Brenda and Dave had built their empire on lies, how they'd intended to make him the scapegoat, how he'd staged his death because it was the only way to stay alive long enough to expose them. The defense tried to discredit him, called him a coward for faking his death, suggested he was complicit, but the evidence was overwhelming. The documents, the recordings, the testimony from investigators, it all pointed in one direction. Amy sat beside me through most of it. She'd waited years for answers about her brother, and even though his body had never been recovered, the investigators had finally confirmed what we'd suspected. He'd been silenced before he could expose the fraud. She cried quietly when they mentioned his name in court. I held her hand. The media was relentless. Reporters camped outside the courthouse every day, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward anyone connected to the case. The headlines screamed, "Beckham's empire built on fraud. Attorney fakes death to expose family conspiracy. Widow uncovers multi-million-dollar scheme." I hated it. Every word, every photo, every invasive question shouted at me as I walked past. The verdict came on a grey afternoon in late autumn. The jury deliberated for less than 8 hours. Brenda was found guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, falsifying government records, obstruction of justice, attempted intimidation of a witness. The judge sentenced her to 25 years without the possibility of parole. She didn't flinch when they read the sentence, just stared straight ahead, stone-faced, as if refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. Dave received 15 years for his role. Fraud, conspiracy, complicity in the cover-up. He looked like he might collapse when the bailiffs led him away. Within days, the Beckham's family business imploded. Federal investigators seized assets, froze accounts, filed liens on properties. The empire Brenda had protected so ruthlessly crumbled under the weight of its own corruption. Outside the courthouse after the sentencing, reporters swarmed. "Maria, how does it feel to finally have justice? Will you be pursuing civil action against the estate? What's next for you and Robert?" I stopped at the top of the steps, Robert beside me, Amy just behind us. The cameras clicked furiously. Microphones crowded closer. I looked at them all, the reporters, the cameras, the crowd of strangers who thought they knew my story, and said nothing. I didn't owe them explanations. I didn't owe them closure or sound bites or quotable moments for their headlines. I wanted peace, not attention. I wanted my life back, not a media circus. Robert took my hand, and together we walked down the steps, past the questions, past the noise, and into the waiting car. That night, we packed everything that mattered into 2 suitcases. By morning, we were gone. The town didn't have a name most people would recognize. It sat tucked along a quiet stretch of coastline, the kind of place where tourists drove through on their way to somewhere more exciting. Small houses with weathered paint, a main street with a coffee shop, a library, and a grocery store that closed at 6. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the shore, grey-blue and constant. It was perfect. We rented a small cottage 3 blocks from the water. White clapboard siding, a porch that creaked, windows that rattled when the wind picked up. Robert registered under a new name, something simple, forgettable. I kept mine. We weren't hiding exactly. We were just choosing to be invisible. I started teaching part-time at the local community college. Basic writing courses, nothing fancy. The students were older, returning to school after years away, hungry to learn. They didn't know my story. Didn't recognize my face from the news coverage that had saturated the media months earlier. To them, I was just Mrs. Maria, the quiet instructor who graded fairly and actually listened. Robert found work doing consulting for a small non-profit, reviewing contracts, advising on compliance issues, quiet, steady work that didn't require him to be anyone important. He seemed lighter somehow, unburdened by the weight of everything he'd carried before. Our daughter visited on a weekend in early spring. She stood in the doorway of the cottage, hesitant, her eyes moving between Robert and me, like she was still afraid one of us might disappear. The trial had been hard on her, losing her father, discovering he was alive, learning that family she'd trusted had orchestrated it all. She'd been angry, confused, hurt, but she came. We sat on the porch that evening, the 3 of us watching the waves roll in. Robert wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for everything, for leaving you, for making you believe I was gone." She didn't answer right away, just stared out at the water, her expression unreadable. "Did you ever think about telling me?" she finally asked, "before it all fell apart?" "Every single day," Robert said. His voice cracked slightly. "But I couldn't risk it. If Brenda suspected you knew anything, she would have used me," my daughter finished. She looked at him then, really looked at him. "I understand why you did it. I wish it hadn't happened." "Me too," Robert said. We sat in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that meant healing had started. Even if it would take time. She stayed 2 more days. When she left, she hugged us both tightly and promised to come back soon. That night, after she'd driven away, I sat alone in the small study we'd set up in the cottage. My old phone, the one I'd kept from before, sat in the desk drawer, powered off, archived. I turned it on one last time. The message history loaded slowly. Dozens of texts from unknown numbers, the ones that had started everything. I scrolled to the very first one, the one that had arrived while I stood outside the church in the rain. "Run, they're watching us." I stared at it for a long moment, remembering the terror, the confusion, the frantic drive through streets that no longer felt safe, remembering how that single message had shattered my grief and forced me to confront an impossible truth. Then I selected the entire conversation thread and pressed delete. The confirmation appeared. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete this conversation?" I tapped yes. The screen went blank. I powered the phone off, placed it back in the drawer, and closed it. Robert found me on the porch later, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars emerge over the ocean. "You okay?" he asked, sitting beside me. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. We'd survived. Not by running forever, not by hiding from the truth. We'd survived by staying, by refusing to let the lies stand, by holding on long enough for everything built on deception to collapse under its own weight. The ocean whispered against the shore. The night was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Sometimes survival isn't about running. It's about standing still long enough to watch the lie crumble, then walking away on your own terms, into a life you've reclaimed, one quiet day at a time.